Remember that time the internet and video game press insisted that the single-player experience was on the way out? As with most times in the world of video games, it was a wild time. However, I remember it quite well, mainly because I remember the anxiety that statement had filled me with. Single-player games are on the way out. Really let that sink in. It almost seems comical in retrospect. Games like God of War 2018, Spider-Man, Control, Undertale, Disco Elysium, Hades, Ghosts of Tsushima, The Last of Us. Wow, there's a lot of Sony games on this list, and so on, exist in defiance to this statement. Such defiance that I bet that those words never rang once in their creators' ears. But I promise you, in the shadow of the gaming landscape at the time, this was a genuine fear for introverted saps like me, and an overconfident doomsday warning for game journalists. I'm the hairiest hair, and this is Ranting Rabbit, a show where the microphone turns on and I give out about times long past. Today, I'm playing my single-player game, sipping my drink, watching my hour-long cutscenes and wondering, were those guys being serious when they said that? That's a well-known problem with journalism no matter where you look. Before there were YouTube thumbnail clickbaits, there was the journalistic integrity destroying headlines. Tabloid magazines in the Walmart checkout lanes would boast about marital affairs that didn't happen. Men's magazines would guarantee your wife's pleasure in the bedroom. Health magazines swore they'd shrink that waist in time for summer. Those magazines were the brain rot of our nation before it became so instantly available that we all had infinite tabloid magazines at the tips of our fingers, carrying them in our pockets at all times. Twitter. I'm referring to Twitter and its cesspool of bad articles and unnecessary drama. Somewhere just in between these time periods was the one that had me scared as a young teen, the era of Games Radar and IGN articles. Both are still somehow going strong today, but back in the day they were my source for everything. It's where my friend and I grabbed some GTA cheat codes, where I looked up how to find Master Chief in Halo Reach. It wouldn't be shocking to learn that that's where I learned a good majority of the foundation of my video game knowledge, which explains why it's mostly garbage. But even now, when I look it up just to make sure I'm not making this up, something rattles my core when I see that single-player games are dead. Is not just a fringe one-off example of an insane clickbaiter. It was a genuine, for real sentiment that players and journalists alike shared. So, after so many years, I finally have my own show and my own microphone, and I'm gonna spend the next however long tearing into these suckers, fools, and men of low moral fiber about not only how wrong they were, but why the sentiment has only gotten more ignorant as time has gone on. In 2010, EA Games' head, Frank Gibeau, was quoted saying that the company was moving the discussion towards how we make connected gameplay, be it cooperative or multiplayer or online services, as opposed to fire and forget packaged goods only, single player, 25 hours and you're out. I think that model is finished. EA might be one of the easiest companies to pick on in the gaming landscape for a multitude of reasons, but in this specific topic, they're the perfect scapegoat to sit down and analyze, because at the time of this statement, they were putting their money where their mouth was. Games like Mass Effect were sloppily wrapping up their story, while the multiplayer mode got plenty of focus. The same goes for the Battlefield series. The story remains, but the multiplayer grows much larger. EA doubled down on its sports games, churning out more titles with less innovation. Dead Space gets a third entry, but with a co-op mode that no one asked for in a world that betrays the former horror of the franchise. Star Wars Battlefront finally returns, but with an extremely bare-bones design that focuses on easily monetizable practices. Titanfall releases and might have been the greatest proof that EA was onto something. It's a multiplayer-only game that launched shortly after a new console release, and through innovation and passion gave a new perspective to the world of online games. And that eventually leads us to Apex Legends, only furthering their evidence of multiplayer being the path to take. EA somehow tripled down on their sports game mantra in this time, and more often we saw single-player games out of them less and less. So much so that I think despite their recent titles proving otherwise, EA is still perceived as a greedy company with their feet firmly planted in the multiplayer world. Obviously, it wasn't wasn't just EA that's the problem, but they were definitely trying really hard to set the standard for the video game industry to follow, and for a time, I was afraid they were succeeding. However, there's enough evidence around to prove this wasn't the case. Hell, even within EA, Mass Effect and Dead Space fans begged for something quality. In return, EA provided pathetically low-effort experiences, and when the fan base responded with a justified onslaught of complaints, EA just used it as fuel for their multiplayer-exclusive narrative. No, EA, the problem isn't that there isn't an audience to serve, it's that you aren't putting in the effort to serve them. Meanwhile, as evidence in favor of single-player focused games doing phenomenal, we have games like Arkham City, The Walking Dead, Metal Gear Rising, GTA 5 before the online component, The Last of Us, Bayonetta 2, Who put this one here? However, there is one final factor that proves that single-player games were never actually in any danger of going anywhere. Because excluded from that list are a handful of incredibly successful games that garnered more attention than any multiplayer game could hope to. Games like Papers, Please, Shovel Knight, and Hotline Miami. In other words, the independent scene. Something no EA executive could have, or more likely, ever wanted to predict was the massive pop-off that occurred during this same era. Through creative passion, hard work, and an additional pinch of spite, independent games blew up in a huge way. Some of these games completely captivated audiences, new and old, rallying them under the same banner, and plenty even managed to overshadow the buzz of any of the massive AAA titles from time to time. Since then, independent studios have only grown, and their games have become more and more common while still remaining exceptional, filling that void left in the industry with the closure and acquisition of most mid-level video game studios, which is a topic for a different video. Regardless, indie games not only helped in proving that single-player games have an audience in the present, they also future-proof the argument against this statement. Their existence is proof for me to say that no matter the time period, I don't think this phrase will ever contain the validity that executives want it to hold. For whenever there is a lack of entries in a particular genre or franchise with a plethora of disappointed fans, there will always be those ambitious creatives to step in and fill the void that the big-time companies leave. So, in other words, even if the industry one day was to turn around and abandon single-player games, I have no shortage of confidence that we won't be as starving for single-player experiences as these article headlines once implied. Single-player games can't die, because, frankly, we won't let them. The legitimacy of the conversation surrounding the concept of multiplayer versus single-player games is honestly a bit of a silly conversation to have in the first place, isn't it? Games were built off the experience of passing time with friends, creating friendly, engaging competition amongst peers physically in the room alongside you. Jumping forward to now, it only makes sense to look at the reality that the online gaming space provides and come to the conclusion that our next massive evolution is in the form of the always online experience. But to think as such would completely ignore what video games became over the many years of their iterative experience. Where once it was a game of Pong, soon it was a game of Super Mario Bros. It would be ludicrous to imply that we, at the time, had evolved past the need of having fellow humans to go up against. To dare attempt to conceive the notion that we had moved beyond people simply because we were able to program a Goomba to take the place as an enemy or obstacle. And yet, that's kind of what these article headlines were saying, but in reverse. Now, the true implication of these articles wasn't that we had evolved past AI or anything, but that the era of games that you can beat and be done with was coming to an end. But still, that's an insane observation of the video game industry to me. Like, seriously, have you guys ever played a story-driven game at all? Imagine if a game like Metal Gear Solid 5 had been an infinite forever game. Imagine how exhausting and stupid that would be. Sorry guys, I know you hate to hear it, but sometimes the value in something comes not from the fact that it's infinite, but that it isn't. Being finite is what makes some experiences so special. However, to pretend that these multiplayer experiences are without their end would be to ignore one of the grandest problems all multiplayer games face. As much as you can design a multiplayer game to be infinite, there is no promise that the player base will support it for that long. There is no guarantee that a game will see anything more than the all-too-common explosion of popularity at launch, only to be followed by the slow degradation of player boredom and fatigue. And when your multiplayer game doesn't have a player base, then what? I'll tell you what, you get delisted. Game companies can't afford to keep the servers up for every game. They can't afford to keep developers on the payroll while they aren't seeing a profit from these dead games. So, as we have seen time and time again, publishers sharpen the axe and let the games, no matter how beloved, drift away into the abandoned abyss, never to be recovered again. And as we inch towards this version of the future where multiplayer games release, you spend your money on it, and then it just disappears, we need to confront what that realistically does to the gaming world. Fans lose trust in their game companies lose trust in their developers, games with short shelf lives are pushed out, and consumers either go the route of fueling this games as service pipe dream, or they grow a backbone and get a little more cautious with their money spending. Either way, multiplayer publishers can duke it out all they want, because that's just one side of the industry. While video games are an ever-evolving landscape of technology and recreational activity, I think the conversation of one style of gaming phasing out and making way for a new one will always be somewhat silly. Because games aren't just a way to pass some time, sometimes they're a vehicle to tell a gripping and emotional story on a level no other medium can provide. Sometimes games can provide an arena for a competitive breed of intelligence and coordination on a level that no sport would be able to. Sometimes games can be a casual experience that allows you to create, dream, and explore. Video games truly have the potential to be anything they wish to be. So to dare imply that single-player games need to move over for the sake of multiplayer is, to this day, ridiculous to me. Because as fun as shooting my buds in the back is, those fleeting moments of joy don't compare to the long-lasting impact that the world of single-player games have left on me. Dare I say it, I probably wouldn't care about the world of video games at all if it was just multiplayer game after multiplayer game. And let's say that kind of stuff is your bag. I get it, but please, for your sake, don't be like these guys. Don't limit games like this. Don't limit yourself like this. Be willing to try new experiences. Be willing to recognize the infinite potential that surrounds us. Why try to make the claim that one thing needs to fade into the sunset so that another experience can rise? Bunk that. Let's all melt in the heat of 1,000 suns, each one representing a facet of this industry we love. Share that love. Express what makes it so special to you. Hopefully, that's what this channel will, over time, achieve. Anyways, I think I've said enough to calm many years of unnecessary frustration. Thanks for listening to an old man yell at a cloud. Catch you down the road. Be excellent to each other.